Maine just confirmed its first Hantavirus Pulmonary syndrome case in a state resident, and it has nothing to do with the ship. This is Hantavirus Watch. Today, a Maine case that isn't Andes and isn't part of the cruise cluster, plus how investigators work an exposure window backward.
2 stories, same news cycle, and I don't want them fusing in anybody's head. Let's keep them separate. One tap on follow, and we'll be back in your ears before you know it.
From Maine Public Health.
Maine CDC was recently notified of the first documented case of Hantavirus Pulmonary syndrome, HPS, in a Maine resident. This resident had not traveled outside of Maine and was reported to have exposures known to be associated with hantavirus.
Maine CDC has confirmed the first documented HPS case in a Maine resident. Key line: no out-of-state travel. That points to a North American strain, almost certainly sin nombre, carried by deer mice. The only overlap with the Andes ship cluster is the timing. Same news cycle.
Right, and I want that nailed down before anyone's brain fuses these together. Hondius is closed. This is a rodent in Maine case. Nobody caught this from a cruise ship.
Correct. Sin nombre spreads rodent to human only, usually when someone breathes in particles from dried droppings, urine, or nesting material. There's no person-to-person chain here. We're talking 2 different strains and 2 different transmission modes.
Okay, but here's my problem. Maine CDC says the person had exposures known to be associated with hantavirus. That's the same vague fog cruise operators fed us all week. What exposure? A barn? A woodpile? A cabin they opened up for summer? People in New England need a noun.
Fair push. With deer mouse exposure, the classic scenarios are sheds, cabins, crawl spaces, enclosed spaces where droppings dry out and then get stirred into the air. And the stakes are real. This can run a 30 to 40% fatality rate per Maine Public Health, with only supportive care available.
30 to 40. So a Maine clinician seeing a fresh case is staring at the same empty shelf. No antiviral, just fluids and oxygen. That problem didn't close when the ship cluster did. If hantavirus normally comes from breathing in rodent droppings or urine, how do investigators even begin to untangle whether people on the Hondius got sick from a port stop in Argentina, something on the ship itself, or from each other?
Start with the clock. Hantavirus usually takes 1 to 4 weeks from exposure to first symptoms. So once you know when someone got sick, you work backward. Where were they in that window? On the Hondius, that math mattered right away for the index case, the first patient. Per a WHO expert quoted by AFP, the Dutch passenger's symptoms began around April 6th, just days after the ship left Ushuaia. Given the incubation period, he almost certainly picked up the virus before he boarded. El País reported the same direction of travel. The WHO's leading hypothesis is that he and his wife were infected off the ship, likely during weeks of travel around Argentina beforehand. Argentina matters here because the WHO consistently ranks it as having the highest hantavirus incidence in Latin America, and Argentine researchers are trapping rats in Ushuaia right now to try to confirm a rodent source. But the cluster kept growing, at least 8 cases, with 3 lab-confirmed and 3 deaths per the WHO as of May 6th. That's when investigators have to press on the second question, person-to-person spread. The Andes strain circulating in Patagonia is the only hantavirus variant known to transmit human-to-human, so they're mapping close contacts aboard the ship and asking whether the later cases only make sense through that route.
So when you say investigators are mapping close contacts, what does that actually look like when passengers have already scattered back to a dozen different countries?
That's exactly the hard part. Johns Hopkins public health experts note that passengers disembarked and started heading home even as the outbreak was still unfolding. So health authorities in multiple countries now have to coordinate to reach and monitor those individuals. Swiss authorities were among the first reported as involved in follow-up. The practical takeaway for anyone who was on that ship, or who thinks they may have had close contact with a passenger. Don't wait for symptoms to surprise you. Contact your local health department or a clinician now, and watch for fever, headache, or muscle aches in the weeks ahead.
If you're tracking hantavirus risk, you may also want Food Recall Watch, daily FDA and USDA food recalls, allergy alerts, and outbreak link notices, from Salmonella and Listeria to pet food advisories. Find it wherever you listen to podcasts. You'll find links to every story we covered today in the show notes, along with the source material if you want to dig a little deeper. If something caught your ear, that's the place to start. That's Hantavirus Watch for today. This is a Lantern podcast.